We're so glad to see all of you be part of our 7th annual Idea Fest, and this crowd is just awesome tonight, and we're very grateful. You can imagine how excited we are to have Senator Bernie Sanders to our stage tonight. I want to take just a minute or two to thank Idea Fest sponsors without whom we couldn't do this. Once again this year, the presenting sponsor is Epic Systems, HealthX Ventures, and Exact Sciences are our other major sponsors. Additional sponsors include Madison Gas and Electric, Alliant Energy, Ascendium Education Group, the University of Wisconsin-Madison, Godfrey Kahn Law, Kessenix, the University Research Park, the Wisconsin Alumni Research Foundation, the Madison Community Foundation, Cargo Coffee, Leopold Books Bar Cafe, Madison College, Forward Theater, and Youngblood Beer Company. Our media sponsors are the Wisconsin State Journal, Madison.com, and Civic Media. As many of you know in this room, William T. Avieu founded the Capital Times in 1917 as a powerful voice for progressive opinion in the spirit of fighting Bob La Follette. We also focus on racial and social justice through the giving of our Avieu Foundation. So if you're not already a member of the Capital Times, we'd sure love you to consider becoming one. You can learn more at captimes.com. I want to take just another moment to make a pitch about tomorrow's program, which is wonderful, and I hope to see most of you back. Tonight's ticket gets you in. We start at 1:20 tomorrow afternoon with two dynamic young progressives in the State Assembly, Francesca Hong and Christina Shelton. On how to make Wisconsin a 21st century laboratory for democracy. They'll be followed by Anita Dunn and Bob Bauer, a consummate D.C. power couple who have played central roles in both the Obama and Biden administrations. Next, after that, that'll be moderated by Dan Balls of the Washington Post, a friend of ours and a wonderful journalist. After that, we'll have David Marinas in conversation with John Eig, whose biography on Martin Luther King this year is on the New York Times bestseller list and also is on Barack Obama's recommended reading list, and that'll be a memorable conversation. After that, it'll be about 5 o'clock. You can buy Eig's books. He's going to be out here autographing as many as he can, or he'll autograph all that are bought. And you can get a beer and a brat, go to the terrace, go to the Rathskeller, and stick around for the evening session featuring Adam Kinzinger, who is who, as you know, rejected his party's MAGA takeover and is a leader in the fight for democracy, and that should be a great conversation. We have two Washington Post journalists talking to him tomorrow night. But that's tomorrow. Okay, tonight our moderator again is John Nichols, associate editor of the Cap Times and co-author of a book with Senator Sanders, It's Okay to Be Angry About Capitalism. In previewing tonight's conversation, John wrote this: Bernie Sanders has come to Madison many times to campaign on behalf of his own presidential bids and the candidacies of many progressive contenders who have sought his backing. But his appearance at the Cap Times 2023 Idea Fest will be different. Sanders often complains that when he does media interviews, he's only asked about matters of the moment. It frustrates him. Well, tonight you can depend on John leading a conversation about the much larger issues that are facing America and get Senator Sanders' perspectives. So without further ado, I'm going to bring John out, who will then in turn introduce Senator Sanders. So John, come on out. Thank you. Thanks for being here.
Thank you. Paul Fanlon. Oh, yeah, brothers and sisters. I'm not going to speak for more than a minute here because I know how very generous you all are to me, but I know who you came here to see. And so what I want to say here is that Bernie Sanders has come to many events associated with the Capital Times, including Bob Fest over many years, which the Cap Times and the Progressive put on. And long before he was Bernie Sanders, he came out here to be with us as an act of solidarity with Wisconsin progressives in some of the toughest times that we were through. He came here in 2011 and marched with us when we were opposing Scott Walker's assault on labor in this state. And in 2014, or 2015, I apologize, in the summer of 2015, when he was beginning his campaign for the presidency of the United States, he had had a handful of rallies across the country. He had had some decent crowds, but they decided that they were going to take a huge risk and go to the Coliseum and see if they could fill that hall. And I got the chance to introduce him that night to more than 10,000 people who said, run for president, go out there and change the politics of this country. And brothers and sisters, Bernie Sanders did just that. Please welcome the United States Senator from Vermont and the man who changed American politics forever, Senator Bernie Sanders.
Thank you. Thank you. Thank you. Well, let me begin by thanking all of you for coming out and telling you that the book that John and I wrote would not have been written without John's great help. I started the book a couple of years ago, and then my day job and elections got in the way, and we had somewhat of a block, and I called John up, and he helped me write what I think is a very important book that I hope you get a chance to read. And what the book is about is trying to force our country, and the book is being translated into a bunch of languages around the world, maybe people all over the world, to start asking questions that you don't see asked in the corporate media or in the halls of Congress. And I think, and I've always thought, that the most serious crisis that we face as a nation is that we don't talk about the most serious crises we face as a nation. And a lot of that has to do with the fact that in many ways our nation is becoming an oligarchic form of society in which a small number of billionaires have extraordinary power over the economic and political life of this country, and the corporate media as well. And congratulations to the Capital Times for being one of the strong, locally owned progressive newspapers in America. So what John and I ask in the book is, how does it happen that in America today we have more income and wealth inequality than we have ever had in the history of the United States of America? What does it mean from a moral and economic perspective that 3 people own more wealth than the bottom half of American society? What does it mean that over the last 50 years there has been a massive transfer of wealth? I'm talking about trillions of dollars going from the bottom 90% to the top 1%. What does it mean that today the weekly wage of the average American worker, despite a huge increase in productivity is less than it was 50 years ago. You got that? There has been, during that period, an explosion of technology. I was mayor of Burlington, Vermont in the 1980s. Thank you, Burlington. All right. When I was elected and went into City Hall, there were no computers. There were no copiers. There was no email. There was no texting, believe it or not. This was in the 1980s. So there has been a massive increase in worker productivity, and yet almost all of the new wealth and income has gone to the people on top. And that is not just a moral issue, it's an issue of power. Because with that power, they decide what workers earn or don't earn. They decide whether workers have decent pensions or not. They decide whether jobs stay in America or go to Mexico or to China. And when we talk about growing power of the people on top, understand that not only do we have more income and wealth inequality that we have never ever had, we have more concentration of ownership that we have ever had in sector after sector, from agriculture to finance to transportation to media, you name it. You got fewer and fewer large corporations controlling what is being produced. And that is certainly true of media. And in this book, John and I have a very long chapter on the media. Because to understand where America is today, it is important to understand that you have 8 major media conglomerates that control what 90% of the American people see, hear, and read. And they determine what is important, what you should be learning about tomorrow, and what you should not be learning about. And you have today, when we talk about concentration of ownership, and we don't talk about it in the media, we don't talk about it in Congress. You got 3 Wall Street firms, BlackRock, State Street, and Vanguard, who are the major shareholders of 95% of the S&P 500 corporations. Check out a corporation. You think it's locally owned? Do you think it's owned by the entity itself? Find out who owns it. And as often as not, it's going to go back to these 3 major Wall Street firms. So when you look at all of that and you say, what's going on in America, what you find is the status quo today is working extremely well, never worked better for the people on top. But what about ordinary Americans? How are they doing? Well, today you got 60% of workers in America who are living paycheck to paycheck. You all know what that means? I grew up in a family that lived paycheck to paycheck. My father dropped out of school at the age of 14. We lived in a rent-controlled apartment. And what paycheck to paycheck means is you hope that at the end of the week or the end of the month, you're going to have enough money to pay the bills. And you pray to God that your kid doesn't get sick because you can't afford the deductible to take him or her to the doctor's office. And God forbid you lose your job, where are you going to find a new apartment when rents are soaring and get your kid into a new school? And if you have a little one, how are you going to afford childcare, which now averages $15,000 a child in the United States? And in many communities, it is a lot higher than that. So what you have in America, and we don't talk about it, is we have not only massive income and wealth inequality, we have an enormous disparity in terms of power. And in my view, one of the reasons that Trump has been as successful as he has been is he has picked up on the reality that tens of millions of Americans feel hopeless about the future. They feel that nobody understands what they are going through. And Trump, who is a fraud and a liar and an imposter, has pretended that he gives a damn about them. One of the points that John and I make in the book, and it's an important political point for today, is we went back to the 1930s and the presidency of Franklin Delano Roosevelt. We didn't go all that much into the specific New Deal legislation that was passed. But the point that we wanted to make, and I think it's an extraordinary point about Roosevelt's presidency, is some of you may remember that in 1937, when he was beginning his second term in office, at his inaugural, he gave that famous speech. I don't remember all of the words exactly, but he said, "I see a nation in which a third of our people are ill-clad, ill-housed." Do you remember that speech? He had been president of the United States for 4 years. In other words, he had the courage to say, "I'm proud of what we have accomplished, but I know there remains massive suffering in America." And one of the weaknesses of the Democratic Party has been not only that they have not done enough for the working class of this country, is they refuse to acknowledge the reality and the pain that tens of millions of people are living through right now. You know, we can talk about Obamacare, and I voted for it, but at the end of the day, you have a health care system today which is broken and dysfunctional. At the end of the day, we are the only major country on earth not to guarantee people health care as a human right. And at the end of the day, and I don't think anybody can dispute this, the function of this healthcare system in America today is not to provide quality care to all people. It is to make huge profits for the insurance companies and the drug companies. And it is important that the Democratic Party and all of us acknowledge that. It is important that we acknowledge that child care is a right not only for children but for working parents. It is important that we recognize that it is insane that in America today, the richest country in the history of the world, some 600,000 of our fellow Americans are sleeping out on the streets or in emergency shelters. And it's not only homelessness, and the problem is we get used to it. We get used to seeing people sleep out on the street in my city, in your city. And yet it is not just the homeless crisis that we face. Some 18 million households are spending 50% or more of their limited incomes on housing. And it's not just housing. You got half of older workers in this country who have nothing in the bank as they move forward toward retirement. And they wonder, with Republicans threatening to cut Social Security, will Social Security even be there for them? So one of the points that John and I make in the book is that in the richest country in the history of the world, at a time when we are seeing an explosion in artificial intelligence and robotics, which will make workers even more productive, now is the time to think beyond the economics of austerity. Now is the time to say that with all of this technology out there, we may be in a moment in American history which is unique in world history. Throughout the history of the world, as everybody here knows, people have struggled, always struggled, to put food on the table for their kids, to put a roof over their heads. Brutal, brutal. We know that right now, Southern Africa, people are starving to death. Children are going hungry. And it's important for us to understand that with all of this new technology coming around. If we have the courage to demand that this technology be used for all of us, not just to enrich the few, we may be at a new threshold of human society in which we can provide a decent standard of living for every man, woman, and child. One of the points that John and I make, and I think it has to be made over and over again, is the people who own America, the ruling class of this country, they are not nice guys. They come across nice guys. They make contributions to the local hospital, to the local art museum, very charitable, nice folks. They're not. During the last couple of years, my office has been involved in probably 10 or 15 strikes supporting workers all over the country. And what has amazed me when you get into these things, you talk to the workers and you talk to the CEOs, is almost without exception, these companies are enjoying huge profits and they're owned by very, very wealthy people. And workers are asking, I'm thinking about a strike of Latino women in California, asking for nickels and dimes, small amount. And the son of a bitch who controls the company is a billionaire, fought him tooth and nail before he ended up giving them something to end the strike. And one of the things that I am very excited about, we talk about it in the book and it's kind of happening, is to my mind, if this democracy of ours is going to be saved, and if this economy is at some point going to be an economy that works for all and not just the few, the reason that might happen is because of the growth and militancy of the trade union movement in America. And what we are seeing right now, right here, and this moment in American history is something extraordinary, is that workers and their unions are standing up and saying to the ruling class, enough is enough, you cannot have it all. Last week I was very pleased to have been in Detroit with Sean Fain and the UAW. And I have to say, that's right. The issues that they are raising are issues which obviously impact auto workers, but the truth is they are fighting for every worker in America. And I will be honest with you, we got involved in this strike, as we often do, and get involved in strikes, and I really did not know the extent of the devastation that workers in the automobile industry had suffered. When I was a kid growing up, the belief was, the truth was, that if you were an auto worker in America with the UAW, you had a job which was the gold standard for the working class of America. You had higher wages, you had pensions, you had great health care, you had good working conditions. And then suddenly, I find out what's going on. I find that there are workers at the automobile plants right now who are making less than $17 an hour who are quitting, walking out of their jobs at Ford and elsewhere in order to get a job in McDonald's. You find that over the last 20 years, real inflation accounted for wages at the big three have gone down by 30%. While the CEOs make over $20 million a year and their stockholders are making out like bandits. You find that there are workers in the automobile industry who work week after week after week, 7 days a week, in some cases without a break. That you got so-called temp workers who are temps for years. You got a two-tier system where one worker works alongside the other, making substantially less than his brother or sister. And the UAW is standing up, and workers all over this country are standing up. So to me, when I look at all of the enormous problems, including the existential threat to our planet of climate change, when I look at all of the problems, where I am most optimistic, where I see a bright light, is that I think people have really had it with the greed of the 1%. And people are fighting back. So with that, let me sit down here, and John is going to ask me some hard questions, and we'll do our best. Thank you very much.
Okay, get your microphone in a place you like it.
All righty.
How's that sound? Can people hear everything? Brothers and sisters, Senator Bernie Sanders. When you asked me to help you write this book, which was back in the summer of 2021, I guess, there's a lot of talk about where it might go. But one of the things we never talked about a title, and we ultimately came to decide to title it "It's Okay to Be Angry About Capitalism." Now, there are an awful lot of people in politics that don't use the word capitalism, except as an exclamation point to say how great everything is. Why did you think, why is it important to use that word when we're talking about being angry and we're talking about the system as it exists today?
Because if we're going to be honest with the American people, if we're going to, and to my mind, one of the real crises that we face is people are giving up on politicians, they're giving up on government because no one is explaining to them what is happening truthfully. Nobody is embracing or dealing with the pain that people are experiencing. So to answer the question, if we're going to deal with it and say, hey, what do you guys think? You got 3 people owning more wealth than the bottom half of American society. Does that make sense to you? We're the only country on earth. Doesn't guarantee health care to all people. We pay by far the highest prices in the world for prescription drugs. Millions of you are deeply in debt, student debt, because of the crime of getting a college education. Young parents can't afford childcare. You can't afford. In other words, these are not, John, separate issues. It's not a housing crisis, a childcare crisis, a healthcare crisis, a climate crisis. It is a systemic crisis of a system based on greed. And that has got to be challenged. And I think, and again, because we've had personal interaction with some of these companies, and as I speak right now, we're dealing with a nurses' strike in New Brunswick, New Jersey. Former CEO made $17 million a year. Nurses on strike for a decent nurse-patient ratio, decent people running up against all of the power in New Jersey politics. And I see this all over the country. So it's important to bring together not only the economic reality, but the political corruption that exists in this country today. So yeah, we live in a democracy. Everybody has the right to vote. I guess they haven't changed that in Wisconsin yet.
It's close. Yeah.
Well, I guess if you're young or a person of color, it might be a little bit more difficult. But, and some of you make campaign contributions, $20 and $50, and that's fantastic. But in our society today, as part of the oligarchy that we live under, if you are a billionaire, you throw in hundreds of millions of dollars to make sure that the candidates you like win, candidates you don't like are defeated. Is that really a democracy? I don't think so. So I think it is important to bring things together and explain the system rather than just look at the individual parts of the system that are failing.
And when you say it's okay, when we say it's okay to be angry about capitalism, I think something else happens there, because we're saying to people that it is that a lot of what they're angry about, and a lot of what they've been told to blame their neighbor for, to blame the immigrant, to blame the refugee, to blame the woman, to blame the trans kid, whatever, a lot of that isn't the problem. It's not the person down the street that's the problem. It is a systemic problem. And in many ways, that frees people to think differently about our politics and about how our politics is working today.
Look, the reality is, and where Trump has been very effective and smart, is to understand that tens of millions of people are very, very angry. They have a right to be angry. If you were working longer hours for lower wages, you would be angry. If you couldn't afford a decent retirement, you would be angry. If your boss was making 400 times what you make, which is what CEOs now make compared to workers, you would be angry. You can't afford housing. If you're worried, maybe most importantly, about the future for your kid, what's your kid going to do? You would be angry. And what, Trump did is not smart enough to have invented this. It's been done before. But what you do in that reality is you take people's anger and then you find some group of people, a minority group, whom you can blame it all. Nothing new. That was done in Europe. It's the Jews, the Gypsies, gay people, people of color, immigrants. Nothing new. We've seen it all. You name it, they have done that. And what our job is, in a very profound way, and it's not easy, and the trade union movement in many ways has led that effort, is to bring people together around a progressive agenda which says whether you're black or white or Latino, Asian American, Native American, do you want decent housing? Yeah, I do. You believe health care is right? Yeah, I do. Do you think workers deserve to earn decent wages? Yeah, I do. Do you think there's something wrong when we have the highest rate of childhood poverty of almost any major country on earth? Yeah, I do. We have got to do exactly the opposite of what Trump does. Trump wants to divide us up. We have to bring our people together around an agenda. And I want to say this, because I think sometimes progressives don't appreciate it. The agenda that we are fighting for is enormously popular. All right? People believe that health care is a human right. People believe that large profitable corporations and billionaires should start paying their fair share of taxes. People detest the greed of the pharmaceutical industry. All right? So the issues that we are fighting for are popular. The problem is that the people we are fighting against have enormous power, and politicians are not comfortable taking them on. And John and I have a chapter, and it's interesting. Today is an interesting day, actually, ironically, that I'm here today. We have a chapter which is pretty simple, and it says, how does it happen when you have a Republican Party that wants to cut Social Security, Medicare, Medicaid, education, give huge tax breaks to billionaires, and absolutely detests labor unions, does not support any pro-union legislation? How do they end up with a majority of working-class people supporting them? How does that happen? And that is a question that the Democrats have got to deal with. And what we say in the book, Democrats have a choice. You can continue to be a party heavily dependent on the corporate world, raise all kinds of money, billions of dollars, do your stupid 30-second ads, or you could be a party which says, hey, we're going to open the door. We want working-class people in our party. We want young people in our party. We want people of color in our party. And as a party, we will take on the big money interests who have so much power. And today is an interesting day. I mean, it's a point that I've been making, for years in the Democratic Party. We wrote a book about it. Others have been making it. Today, as you may or may not know, President of the United States announced that he would be on a picket line this coming week with the UAW. And what President Biden has made it clear, he's going to stand with the workers on this issue. So I think we are making some progress. And also, frankly, I have been very impressed because I didn't quite expect it to see, a lot of Democrats getting onto the picket line, making it clear they're standing with UAW. So this is the direction we have got to go. And if the Democratic Party says, of course, we're going to fight to make sure that women control their own bodies. Of course, we're going to fight for voting rights. Of course, we're going to fight against all forms of bigotry. That goes without saying. But in addition to all of that, yes, we're going to stand with the working class of this country. You do that, we'll transform this country, and Democrats will win landslide victories.
You talked about the popularity of the progressive agenda, and there's a lot of the book, a huge portion of the book is devoted to organized labor. One chapter on, making work as it exists better, another chapter on the future of work. And it's no secret that you and I are very pro-labor. But were you surprised at all when you saw the polling that showed that 75% of Americans support the UAW strike? I mean, this is striking numbers.
Well, first of all, you're seeing a lot of polling that is pro-labor. I think support for labor unions in general right now is higher than it has been for many, many decades.
It's the highest since the 1930s.
All right. And why is that? And remember, this is despite a corporate media which doesn't even allow us to understand what unions do, who the union leadership is. And the reason for that is I think people are beginning to catch on that there's something immoral about a system in which so few have so much while so many people struggle, and an understanding that these guys on top have all of the power, and that if we're going to get our fair share, people are going to have to come together, and the most effective way to do that is through a union. So I am not surprised by that. I think people have had it up to here with the greed of, you see the UAW. What are they talking about every day? They're talking about corporate greed. They're talking about how in the last 4 years, the CEOs, all of them each one of them makes over $20 million a year. Their salaries have increased by 40%, and workers are falling further and further behind. And when they say that, John, that resonates to every worker in America. They understand that. It's not just the automobile industry. It's going on all over this country. And the other thing that they talked about, and you and I wrote about this in the book, and people laugh at them, you're really crazy. They talk about a 32-hour work week. All right, that's one of the demands they're raising. And why are they raising that? Because they understand that robotics and new technology is going to greatly increase worker productivity, of course, in the automobile industry, but in every other industry in America. And I want everybody here to take a deep breath and think about it. The likelihood is that the job you have today ain't going to be there in the same form in 10 years or 20 years. Not going to be there. Who's going to make the decisions about what happens to you? Who's going to make the decisions whether you benefit from this new technology and increased worker productivity, or whether the people on top do? And what the UAW has put it on the table and said, hey, if you're going to increase worker productivity, we want to benefit from it. And the idea, it's a funny thing about this 32-hour work week. Most people don't know that the 40-hour work week was established by the National Labor Relations Act in 1940. What is that, 83 years ago?
83.
We had the 40-hour work week 83 years ago. Do you think worker productivity has increased a little bit since then? Do you think maybe it's time to rethink that? And think about it. One of the crises that we face, everybody here knows that this country and COVID has added to it. We have a very serious mental health crisis in America. And one of the reasons for that is that people are incredibly stressed out. They're really stressed. They're stressed from, on an economic basis. Their families are stressed. They're worried about their kids, their parents, everybody else. And what the UAW is saying is, hey, if we have all this new technology, we want to benefit from that. And we want to see a reduction in our work week. without a loss of pay so that our people will have more time to spend with their kids, maybe more time for culture, more time for education, more time to breathe, rather than live under the kind of stress that so many Americans are living under today. There's a chapter, we do a long chapter on the healthcare system, and one of the points we make is not only that 85 million people are uninsured or underinsured, not only that we're spending an outrageous amount of money on healthcare, but that our outcomes are worse than most other countries. Our life expectancy, which at the end of the day is
kind of the ultimate measure.
Yeah. I mean, what do we want? We want a society where people live long, happy, and productive lives, right? That's what we want. Our life expectancy is way below many other countries, and it is actually declining. And the reason for that, the doctors tell us, is what they call diseases of despair, is that in large parts of this country, working class people, lower income people, kind of given up. And they're turning to drugs. We lost 100,000 people last year from drug overdoses, alcohol, cigarettes, obesity. People are stressed. So I think what we want to be thinking about is, as we move to the future, how do we create an economy in which people can breathe, can have a decent standard of living? Look, if everybody in this room had a good job, you had health care as a right, your kids had a great education, you don't have to worry about the cost of college, the air you breathe was clean, you know what? Life would still be tough. Life is difficult, terrible things happen. But if we could take a step forward to take at least the economic burden off, do you know what health care for all would mean in this country? The people's happiness and well-being, that you don't have to worry. When you run for president, you go all over this country. And I had meetings with people who talked about being bankrupt, going bankrupt because of a serious illness in the family. Can you imagine somebody in your family has cancer? That's terrible.
Bad
and then
enough.
on top of that, the family goes bankrupt because they can't afford the $100,000 in bills. What kind of insanity is that? So if we could at least provide economic security to all of our people, and we are wealthy enough to do that, I think people would feel a lot less stressed, and the quality of life in this country would be significantly improved.
I want to pivot a little bit to a topic that we write about in the book that is not always associated with you. It's not that people would suggest you don't care, but it's just not one that people always think about as, yeah, Bernie Sanders associated his name with that. And that is education. And you are chairman, obviously, of the Senate committee that deals with education, so there's an association there. But when we were working on the book initially, talking about, kind of plotting it out, I was struck by the fact that this is a huge passion of yours. And when you spoke about education, you spoke about it as something that can be very damaging to young people if it isn't done right. You had a lot of perspectives coming out of your own grandchildren, seeing their experience. And I am struck by the fact that one of the things that you said to me early on was, we've got to communicate that education shouldn't just be about how to get a job. Education should be about how to be a human being and how to live a good life.
Well, the obvious, thank you for that question, John. The obvious points to be made is that education is an inherent part of being a human being. And that I think healthy people want to be learning to the day they die. It's just what healthy people try to do. And the other obvious points to be made is that we treat the children of this country in a totally abysmal and selfish way. This is the wealthiest country in the history of the world, and yet we have the highest rate of childhood poverty of almost any major country on earth. And it was obviously, as somebody was chairman of the Budget Committee who helped write the American Rescue Plan, we made sure that every parent in the country, or virtually every parent in the country, was able to get a $250 a month tax credit. And the result of that was a significant decline in childhood poverty in America.
It went down to around 5%, right? It was dramatically reduced.
Right. And we... The simple government policy, doing what countries all over the world do. If you're a parent, you know that it's tough to raise a kid today. You need some help, and that's what we did, $250 tax credit for each child you have, $500 for 2 kids. And yet, we did that in the rescue plan, which was an emergency plan, good only for a certain period of time. We tried to put it in Build Back Better. We got 0 Republican support, and 2 corporate Democrats refused to support us. And that program ended, and then, unsurprisingly, childhood poverty went way up.
It has, in the latest data, more than doubled.
Yeah.
So we have this real-life measure here. You do the program, you take it down to around 5%. You stop the program, you're up at 12%, I think. I hope I've got my stats right.
And then, so that's one part of it. Then you look at childcare. I mean, this is kind of like a no-brainer. Every psychologist, child psychologist in the world will tell you that the most important formative years of a human being's life, both intellectually and emotionally, are 0 through 4, right? Enormously important. So if you understand that, you say, my goodness, all right, childcare is a major priority. We want to have the best teachers and adults in the room with the kids because this is so important for the children. And yet, in a nation with a huge child poverty rate, we pay child care workers in America $13, $14 an hour. They are overworked, undertrained, and right now, by the way, there is a cliff that is we're going to go over a child care cliff. The money we put in the American Rescue Plan is going to expire, and millions of families are going to be struggling with whether or not they're going to be able to have child care in America. Think about the insanity of that. Every sane person knows you got to give kids an opportunity to grow emotionally, intellectually, and we treat them like dirt. And then on the other part of the spectrum is higher education. We live in a very globally competitive world. There was once a time, I don't know exactly when, not that many years ago, when in America, proudly, we had the highest percentage of our people were college graduates. We're way down on the list right now. Countries all over the world moving ahead of us. And the reason is the cost of college has exploded, and you got millions of people trying to figure out how they can pay their student debt. So you would think, I mean, if you just look at it from a crass economic point of view, all right, if I want the best workforce in the world, I got to make sure that our young people get not only college, but the kind of hands-on training they need. They want to be an electrician, plumber, whatever it may be. They need training. And yet we make it almost impossible for these young people to get that education. And then on top, of all of that, as a nation, what we essentially say to our teachers and educators, you're not important. I mean, when I was running for president, I remember being in New Hampshire, and the NEA there was telling me there were school districts, this is a few years ago, probably went up a little bit, where teachers would start off $24,000, $25,000 a year. So if you are a bright young person, why would you want to be a teacher? Despite the fact that being a teacher is perhaps the most important profession in America. We underpay teachers, and they are right now dealing with so much stress because of COVID. I mean, I went around Vermont talking to teachers, and teachers say, Bernie, I used to teach Spanish. I don't. Right now I'm a counselor because the kids are dealing with so many issues. All right, so we ask so much of teachers, and then we underpay them, and in Florida and elsewhere, we treat them with total contempt. So you need a revolution in culture and thinking and say, you know what? Yeah, football is important. I know here I am in Wisconsin. I know, I'm a big football fan. Quote me correctly, I love football. But maybe, just maybe, we might want to have as much respect for our teachers as we do for our football players.
And he said that on a night when the Badgers are playing. So a couple more questions here. In the education chapter, we did an interesting thing. In fact, this sort of infused the whole book. We didn't just talk to American experts. In the education chapter, we arranged and called up the Minister of Education in Finland. Now, why did we choose Finland? Because they top every measure in their educational achievement. They invariably, they top the world as regards success in education. So we did something that maybe you might even think journalists would do. And that is that we said, well, let's call this woman up and figure out how it works. So the Secretary of Education in Finland is a 33-year-old mom named Liv Anderson. And it happened that she was a Democratic Socialist, and she was really excited to talk to Bernie Sanders.
Part of a coalition government.
Part of a coalition government, but she was really excited to talk to Bernie Sanders. So she came on the call. But I want to reference that because one of the things that you insisted on in every chapter of the book, I think every chapter, was that we use international examples. We use other countries as a way of saying, this has been done. I wanted to talk about that for a little bit because you were actually, as a presidential candidate, you were attacked. You were criticized because you kept bringing up Denmark. But you did in the book. Look, Denmark's in there a lot, as well as Finland.
Look, and again, this is what the corporate media doesn't do, what we don't do well in education is, when I was a mayor, what good mayors try to do is you steal ideas from other cities around the country. That's what good mayors do, Oh my God, they're doing this here, they're doing that there, and you adopt it. That's a good thing to do. You learn from what others are doing well. I live in Burlington, Vermont. I live 50 miles away from the Canadian border. Now, somehow or another, other than Quebec speaking French, they're really quite like us. And somehow or another, if you end up in the hospital in Quebec or Ontario, any place else, you have serious surgery, and you're there for 3 weeks, 4 weeks. How many people here know what the bill is when you get out? Zero. If you go to any doctor you want, tell them your name, you don't take out your credit card, you don't take out your wallet, walk in, you get your examination. Right. Canada spends about 50% per capita of what we spend on health care. Mm-hmm. All of their people are insured. There are no out-of-pocket expenses. The quality is as good. They have their problems, but their quality in general is as good or better than ours, and they spend half as much. Now, one of the points, and I always do this when I go on TV, is you would think that somebody on CBS or NBC, Fox Television, would ask that question. They spend half as much, cover all of their people, and their quality is as good or better. Gee, how does that happen? Anybody here ever hear that question asked on television? That's quite unbelievable. But it's not just, John was talking about education. People don't know this. I think it's in Germany now. If you're an American, you can go to Germany, they will give you free tuition in a German school. It's kind of a no-brainer to say that if you're concerned about the economic future of your country, you want people to have the best education. You don't want to say to kids, oh, sorry, you can't be an engineer or a doctor or a teacher because you can't afford to go to college. That is totally irrational. So, we talk about that public universities and colleges should be tuition free. Is that a radical idea? So let me tell you how radical.
I just want to interrupt and say I noticed that the parents were actually applauding as loudly as the students.
That's right, believe
that
me.
one. Yeah.
This is such a radical idea that not only does it exist in a number of countries today, it actually used to exist in a country we're all familiar with called the United States. Back in the day pre-Reagan era, you had great universities. I don't know about here, but in California, which is one of the great universities in America, New York City, tuition was free or virtually free. So think about that. 50 years ago, we did have public colleges and universities tuition free, and now it is unaffordable for so many of our young people. So.
A couple things people don't know about you. First and foremost, you're a strikingly good athlete. No, it's an interesting thing because we actually...
you didn't know I'm running the marathon tomorrow.
I know, you got to get on the
plane. Got to get my training.
Yeah. No, but you are a strikingly good athlete, and in American politics, that's sort of something of a big deal. It's like, wow, that's something. But you don't make a big deal about it. But
John, that was 50 years ago. What do you want from me?
I have seen you playing baseball with your grandkids, and
yes.
there's my favorite video of you playing baseball with your grandkids is one where the kid hits the ball and you catch it with the glove.
And he goes, I know, I have a great rivalry with my 12-year-old grandson. He's constantly trying to beat me, and I caught the ball, and he was really pissed. But it's, yeah, you know, it's, when I was a kid, I was a miler, half miler, and cross-country runner. So I got a little bit of endurance, learned to experience pain, not as much as I deal with in Congress, but it was a lot.
The reason I bring that up is that I think the way that media covers you an awfully lot is a very one-dimensional way. And that is as a U.S. Senator, very serious political figure. But as people have noticed tonight, there's probably 20 times where people have laughed at things you've said. And you have a strong sense of humor. You have actually, and I know you don't like this because I say it quite sometimes, I actually think you're an optimist.
Well, my wife, Jane, would be very surprised to hear that. I'll let her know that you said that.
No, I tell you, we were just wrestling with writing the introduction to the paperback edition of the book, and we were wrestling with the start of it, and he insists on this incredibly dark opening. It's like things are really rough, and it could get worse. But one of the things that strikes me about you is that you are 82 years old. You have accomplished a lot in your life. You recently had a New York Times bestseller, which was on the bestseller list for 8 weeks, I might add, and got to number 2, would have gotten to number 1 if it wasn't for that darn Prince that had his book. You could easily give up on this thing, right? And you could rest on your laurels. Instead, I see you going out with more energy and more determination now than at probably any time in the last 30-some years that I've known you. What keeps you
thanks for the question. And here is the truthful answer, and that is, I never thought that I'd be running for president and all of that stuff. But when you do that, and you end up going to literally every state in the country, and you speak to, in some cases, tens of thousands of people. And always in my mind, there was this one image. I was in California in their agricultural Fresno or someplace down there. And the sun was going down. It was beautiful country. And there must have been 10,000 people there. And they were black and white and Latino, very heavily Latino community and Asian American. There was a whole mix of young people. And it was a beautiful, beautiful, moving sight to see so many young people. And I saw this all over this country, not just in California, so in Wisconsin. You see beautiful young people who really want to create a nation based on humane values, based on economic, social, racial justice. They really want to do it. And when you see that with your own eyes and you touch it with your own hands, it is hard not to be inspired and to be optimistic about the future. So. And I should also add, it's not just young people. I mean, literally today. I was in Detroit a week ago tonight, Friday, and standing shoulder and shoulder with workers who have had enough, who are prepared to go out on strike and take on the greed of their corporate owners, that's inspiring to me as well. So I have been, very fortunate as Vermont senator, seeing it in my own state and seeing so many beautiful people. I mean, one of the things that I am just very lucky and very fortunate is I've met so many thousands of beautiful people in this country, and that is the wellspring of the optimism that I feel, is that, it's a different world, and you go to Congress and you can get depressed in about 5 minutes, but you get around the country, and I want everybody here to know it. There are some extraordinarily beautiful people who are struggling for a different world, a better world, and we should feel very good about that.
Let me close off with just, because you took us to the edge of this. Are we going to get there?
Well, we're not going to get there in our lifetime. The struggle is, the opposition is enormously strong. I mean, it's the point when I was not being facetious when I said these people who have so much wealth and power, they're not nice guys. And they really are not. They are incredibly greedy. And they would just as soon destroy our social security system or cut benefits or destroy public education rather than paying a few bucks more in taxes, despite the fact that they are phenomenally wealthy. I mean, you would think that if you were worth a few $1 billion, you might say, what the hell, so I pay a few more dollars in taxes. But it's more than the money, I think. I mean, and I think, we live in a society where for a variety of reasons there are a lot of addictions, whether it's drugs or alcohol or tobacco, whatever it may be. And these people are really addicted. They are addicted to their power and to their wealth. And they're going to fight like hell to maintain the status quo. They don't want to give it up. They got $50 billion, they don't want to give you a nickel. They don't want to pay a dime in taxes. They want to crush unions. We dealt with the guy who's head of Starbucks, Mr. Schultz. The guy's a multi-billionaire. Young people have courage to organize, and he did everything he could to make sure that they couldn't form a bloody, union shop. So these guys have it, and I just want everybody to understand this. They are ruthless. They are smart. They have they have an army of accountants and lawyers and public relations people. When we take on the drug companies in Washington, we're not taking on the CEO of some Pfizer company. We're taking on 1,800 paid lobbyists. That's right. For 535 members of Congress, they got 1,800. They're all over the place. They write the legislation. They are ruthless. And they want it all. And that's what it's about. So if you want to create, it was, who was the great abolitionist? Frederick Douglass. Mm-hmm. And you probably remember these things better than I do. What was his
quoted
quote?
in the book. I might
Yeah,
know it,
and what he said.
Power concedes nothing without a demand.
Yeah, and if you want something, you're going to have to struggle for it. They're not going to give you anything. They want it all. And I say that not to be rhetorical or to be quotable here. I mean, I deal with these guys every day. They make billions. Their workers are asking for a few dollars. They want to cut their health care. They want to do it because they can do it. Drug companies can charge you the highest prices in the world because they can do it, because they own the Congress and their campaign contributions. So if we're going to be successful, and you're seeing that right now as we speak with the UAW, you're going to have to take these guys on. And, we're all, not in the automobile industry. We have our own struggles in our own ways. We didn't talk very much about climate, which is, in fact, the existential issue of the moment. And I want you to think about this, and we write this, when we talk about these guys not being nice guys. I can remember, I'm older than most of you, having the tobacco industry coming to Washington. You remember that picture? They all raised their hands. Mm-hmm. And some congressman says, tell me, do you believe that tobacco causes cancer and emphysema and other illnesses? And they're under oath. Oh, no, we have no evidence to indicate that. They knew it. They were lying through their teeth. You have the Wall Street guys who were selling worthless tranches of mortgages. They knew what they were doing, and they crashed the entire economy in 2008. You got the people at Purdue Pharmacy and other pharmaceuticals and other pharmaceutical companies selling opioids they knew that were addictive. I mean, there's towns in West Virginia that were flooded with these pills. They knew they were addicted, and they hired more salesmen to sell them, and people died by the thousands. And then right now, maybe the biggest issue, back, I think it was in the 50s or the 60s, don't remember. You had scientists telling the fossil fuel industry that their product was going to warm the planet and cause devastating crises. And what did the fossil fuel industry do? They spent tens of millions of dollars lying and trying to obfuscate the issue. It hasn't only been in the last few years where the media. I remember a couple of years ago, somebody else, can't remember who it was, I think Senator Schatz and myself, we invited the CEOs of the major networks in to say, stop this nonsense of having two sides of the story with regard to climate change. There's only one side. Climate change is real, it's caused by human activity. And, recently they've been doing that. And right now, it's just so you know it. I mean, the good news, our good friend Keith Ellison in Minnesota and all over. Yep. California, they're beginning to move, and all over. Cities, states are telling the fossil fuel industry, you lied for years. You are causing massive damage, and you're going to pay for that. And we have written to the Attorney General of the United States, and I'm not happy, trust me, with his response at this point, which is a no response. And that is, he has the grounds to go after the fossil fuel industry on what they call RICO, racketeering charges. These people have lied for years. Their product, God knows, no product has ever done as much damage as what they are doing all over the world. And they should be held accountable legally and financially. So.
You sounded almost angry there.
Well, I am.
You're angry about capitalism.
Well, I'm angry about, on this particular case, and we're going to deal with it. It's very much on my mind. So that chapter is not over. We're going to deal with the Attorney General.
Before I let you go, I want to close off with one question about a friend of yours, which I think some people here know was a dear friend of yours. During the 2016 campaign, when you were in the midst of an incredibly intense race with Hillary Clinton here in Wisconsin, which ended up with you winning 71 of 72 counties.
Thank you, Wisconsin.
You took a break out from your campaign. You took like a good part of an afternoon off to go visit Ed Garvey. And that, to me, that was one of the things that made me actually like you. Because when you put politics aside because a friend of yours is ailing and you actually, in the midst of an incredibly intense time, go and give that person time and care and love. I want you to talk for a moment about your friend Ed Garvey.
Well, Ed was, he and his whole family are just very, very wonderful people. And I was just pleased to come here year after year for the Fighting Bob Festival, which I think. So we love Ed and his family.
And Ed did a really cool thing. When you were mayor, didn't he bring up football players at some point? There was a...
Well, he came, he helped back in the day using video to make your point was not all that novel. It was a pretty novel idea. And he came to Vermont. There was a railroad strike or railroad circumstance, and he did some video for us. And I very much appreciate all of what Ed did.
He put football players in the videos.
Oh, right. He was. That's right. Yeah, that's right.
Well, brothers and sisters, Senator Sanders has been very generous with us coming out, as he has many times to Wisconsin before. Wisconsin, as you note, has rewarded you with some pretty strong political support over the years. And I really appreciate you coming. I would like only to ask you, as we close out here, if you would give us a thought on, and you've been very critical throughout your comments on journalism and stuff like that, but a thought on the importance of local journalism.
Oh, it's of enormous importance. And what John and I discuss in the book, in a sense, two separate issues, both of which are enormously important. Number one is that when you're looking at CBS or NBC or the New York Times or the Washington Post, these are entities owned by the 1%. And it's not to say that they, on any given day, are not going to do a really good story. They do. And it's certainly not to say that their reporters are dishonest or anything else. They work hard, they try. But what it is to say is they choose for corporate interest to not discuss some of the most fundamental issues facing this country. And that's what we have to, it's asking the right questions is much more important than coming up with the right answer. So the questions that we have to ask is, how do we end up where we are today, where so few have so much wealth and power, so many have so little? That's a question virtually never asked by the corporate media. That's one issue. And then the second issue is that with the explosion of the internet, we're seeing small papers in my home city and around the country unable really to compete. They can't get the advertising they need, and they're going under. So you have many, many communities in America where there's virtually no entity covering City Hall, covering the events at the school department, school board issues. And that's really serious stuff. And what John and I does, and John knows more about this than I did, and he was very helpful on that chapter, is look at some of the really innovative ideas that are taking place in Europe, where you have public, democratic, with a small d, funding of journalism, where people have a right to know what's in their community, that you can have good media that is not just owned by some large corporate entity. So that's something I think we should be exploring and looking at throughout the country.
Bernie Sanders and I are about to leave the stage. Senator Sanders is going to come out and actually sign a few books tonight. But I want to warn you, he has a tight schedule, and he's going to have to, he's actually flying out or heading out tonight. So it's not a big, long time, but we'll do a few of those. And I would simply like to say thank you, Senator Sanders, not just for coming to Idea Fest, but thank you for all of the things you have done to raise the fundamental issues of economic and social and racial justice in this country.
Thank you, John.
Thank you, brother.
Thank you.